entering if they don't really know where to find it. And I guess for us, I guess it might be a postmortem thing as well to improve on this resource that we've already started, I think, for a few years already. The second point I wanted to, actually that was the first 2 points. The second point I wanted to talk about was, I think our group did a really interesting analysis where we were not really considering merging of 2 workshops per se. In some areas we were looking at the policy questions where one that we've provisionally accepted may be missing a few policy questions, and that kind of merging is an interesting way of making a workshop proposal more full. I think Sylvia's suggestion just now was quite interesting. I was just trying to digest it as she was suggesting it, that we could possibly send a pack of policy questions to either the provisionally accepted workshop proposers for them to actually think about, hey, if we already have a workshop on this theme, we can include this aspect, we can include another aspect. Another thing that we are, as a group yesterday we discussed was if a certain provisionally accepted workshop was missing one element, we could possibly pull a policy question from a different one that wasn't accepted and possibly pull another, resource person, a technical person into it to make the diversity more in line with what we're asking for. So I guess these are the 3 points I really wanted to highlight.
I think those are very useful comments, Jennifer. I was taking some more notes as well. Thank you. Tamaya?
Thank you. I also have 2 points I want to make really quickly, not necessarily on the security track, but on our process in general. I don't know if that's the right time to do it now, or should I wait until we all finish? So on one hand, about the flow and socializing the policy questions or the issues in between the workshops of a specific track. I think that's a really good idea. We need to perhaps think it through of how we're going to do that. But I think it's really important for the workshops in a certain track to be aware of the context that the workshop is going to be happening in, so they can link ahead before with the other sessions. And I'm wondering, I know we haven't discussed yet the topping and tailing sessions, but I'm wondering if that might be also the job of the topping session, because we don't know what workshops the proposers are going to do between now and the IGF, but they are going to be there at that time. And maybe they can devote half an hour of their time or an hour and a half of their time to really look into how the flow is going to look like, how the 3 next days are going to look like, and how are they also planning their reporting out from their session to make sure that their information gets then picked up in the right way once the 3-4 days are over. So I'm wondering if this socializing of the flows can actually be done on the spot as well, with the topping session feeding into the tailing session. And then the second point I wanted to make about the speaker profiles. I think that's a very pertinent comment, as Jennifer said, that came up yesterday as well in the open consultations. I've seen it as well when I was marking sessions. I'm guessing that for this year we have it, unfortunate or not, I think this has happened already. But before we start the process next year, I would recommend we go through a update your profile campaign for all of those people who are already there. A quick automatic email. You are in our database. These are our information about you. Is that correct? Could you please update? Perhaps that would be a solution to improve things for next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamaya. And we'll come to the last semantic track in a moment, but I'm just wanting not to lose track of some of these discussions. And we'll come to the topping and tailing as a, maybe we could ask the Secretariat to work across the 3 thematic working groups and understand what the experience was specifically as it relates to profiles and the resource section of the website, so that we can ask you, I mean, if that makes sense, to go out as with email, as Tamaya just said, or if there's different advice we need to put within the workshop submission process, that sort of thing. But if we could ask the Secretariat maybe to take that lead, maybe we could ask the thematic working groups to take the lead on preparing the package, which says this is the track we've put together, here's a high-level intro, here are the other workshops that are engaged in it, here are the policy questions, so that, you know, we're managing that communication out to the accepted workshop proposal organizers. And I think what we need for the Secretariat and support there is the policy questions that are associated with those workshops. And I'm sure Louis can do a quick extract. And then an easy mailing list or facility to email all those workshop organizers, I'm assuming is the right. But I'm just trying to make sure that, you know, before we all leave the room and get on with other things, that we actually have some clear kind of next steps for this process, because it's new. I think it's coming together really, really well. So again, thanks to all the working groups for all the work. Ben, I think we're ready now to go to the final thematic track, and then we'll come back to the topping and tailing later. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. So I'll briefly recap what I went into in more detail yesterday. We've provided to the MAG and to the Secretariat the list of 20 workshops we propose take up the 20 slots that were provisionally allocated to our theme. We also provided specific comments for each of those 20 workshops that should be provided to the organizers for how they might improve their workshops. That could include ways in which they could bring in, diversify their policy questions, or bring in different stakeholder groups, or where they might be weak on diversity. We didn't place any conditions on the approval of any of these workshops. We didn't make any proposals for merging workshops, but we did suggest in these written comments to 5 of the 20 workshop organizers that they look at some specific other workshops and consider whether they could incorporate ideas, concepts, or even speakers from those workshop proposals, which we felt were in a similar area, but might, but by looking at them, might help them broaden out their workshop and bring in other perspectives. In terms of a flow, I may be at risk of disappointing you here, Lynn, but we've grouped the 20 workshop proposals into sub-themes, which is what you can see in the table in front of you, which was in the document that I've sent a couple of times to the MAG as well. There's no particular order or flow. To my mind, these are different elements of data governance, but one does not necessarily feed into the other. So in this theme, I don't think it's necessarily relevant to have a flow. We did make a recommendation, which is the first bullet underneath the table, that the Secretariat, when scheduling these 20 workshops, avoid scheduling any workshops within the same sub-theme against each other, so that anyone who's particularly interested in jurisdictional or sovereignty issues can attend all 3 of those workshops and not risk, and there not be a clash, as an example. And otherwise, there's no particular thought on how this grouping could be used after the schedule is drawn up, but maybe that will become clear when we go to the topping and tailing. And also, you've just talked about an action that the working groups could take up as to packaging information that goes back to these successful workshop organizers. So maybe it's used there as well. We did provide an additional 3 workshops that could be taken forward if time was found in the schedule. Those are the ones at the bottom of the page. They are ranked in order, so if there's only one slot available, then it would be the top, and so on. And this, as we discussed earlier, was on the basis that we were provisionally allotted 20 slots of 90 minutes, and we've come up with 15 slots of 90 minutes and 5 slots of 60 minutes, I think. And finally, as I mentioned yesterday, we were asked by the security working group to look at a particular workshop which had some data governance elements, and our proposal after reflecting on it was that it has both data governance and safety elements to it, and would be worth taking forward as a cross-cutting workshop, using up some of that additional time that's been created by some of the approved workshops not being a full 90 minutes long. So that was what I wanted to present. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Let me see if there are any other comments from the working group members first. Maria?
Thank you. I just want to point it out that from this presentation of the last group, it's pretty clear that the IoT thing emerged as a cross-cutting, because each one of the groups are considering additional workshop or one of the workshop in the flow that takes on the IoT topics. So probably it's a very good candidate. And to the last suggestion about the workshop 170, that it was referred from security to data governance group, I think that there are another workshop in the security track that already covers some of that, but it's true that it's also a cross-cutting issue that could be considered for another category of session. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And Timea, is that an old hand? And Yuta, it's a new hand. You have the floor, Yuta.
Yes, that's a new hand. I just became aware that the data governance group also had like a sub-theme, human rights and internet ethics, which is somehow related to what we have in the data in the security and safety group. So I don't think this should be merged in any way, but I suggest that the Secretariat has a look into the flow of the workshops and then try to have these grouped somehow and one after another, but not overlapping like it was suggested by data governance already, that workshop proposals that address similar or close to each other issues, that they are not go into the program in parallel, but as a subsequent order. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. I just, Danko's here, Jevtovich. I just wanted to say thank you, Ben, on behalf of our work group. He presented very well, but he also led the discussion and preparation of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Danko. We used to say in the technical committee that we never thought Vint Cerf slept because he was on the internet all the time, and I'm actually pretty convinced that both Ben, Yuta, and, oh my God, I'm drawing a complete blank. Paul. Oh my God, I'm sorry. Not enough caffeine, not enough food. Paul also don't sleep. I mean, they have been leading these efforts through the the actual MAG meeting some time ago, and then through this entire process too. So thank you. I would actually like to still challenge the last group, the data governance groups, to see if they can find a graphic that actually groups, and maybe it's just a simple graphic that doesn't have a flow and a linkage, but looks somewhat similar to the other one, so that when you're looking across the program, there's some kind of similarity. You can see that they're either grouped by this topic or something, and maybe there's a creative person within the MAG that can help facilitate that, or maybe it's within the Secretariat, but something that kind of gave some consistency against them, so as you move back and forth between them, it's confusing enough, we're all pretty, but when you come and you look at 150 possible workshops you can go to, it's kind of nice to have some overall structure that helps you figure out where the key kind of buckets or focuses are, and you have the 6 kind of buckets there already.
I mean, maybe only as a first step, but the way that Jutta's group have presented it, maybe without arrows, but I could just use that format and it would look the same with the information that's on the screen, which would give a graphic. I don't know. And then we'll find out later where these graphics end up being used and how, but I'm sure I could transform the table that way to help provide a more uniform kind of presentation of how all of the workshops are grouped.
If we do think of it as sort of a stack of issues, just scanning the titles, it seems that some of them are more kind of an operational or factual or framework or context or that sort of thing, and then others really are getting to a different sort of questions. Maria, you have the floor.
Yeah, only like a pragmatic approach to this. If the data governance group, they don't think necessarily that there is a structured flow, like in the case of the other two tracks, something that can be useful, it's like look the topics, the session of the data governance track in light of the other ones. So maybe there are some of them that not necessarily like have a specific flow, like regarding the data track specifically, but maybe some of them could have a specific flow, like contributing to the other sessions in the other tracks. So in that sense, it precisely will fulfill this idea that people that want to benefit of participating in the different track will have that opportunity. So maybe like to have one of the track that doesn't require a more like fixed flow, provide that flexibility to fill those gaps and provide the opportunity of the participant to follow like equally or in a more distributed way the different tracks as a like practical suggestion. Thank you.
No, that's another thought as well. Any other comments or questions on? Are there any? We'll come to top and tailing in a moment. But are there any kind of general observations or questions from the MAG? And then I'm going to ask the same thing from the Secretariat and from yourself, Danielle, as well. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you, the Chair, for giving me the floor. First, I want to commend the track leaders. Ben did a good work for us in the data and data governance. And Jutta has done a very good work, plus Paul. But on a general note, I want to, since Jutta's group, I think he said they did not consider the diversity. Are we going to look at diversity again in total when we would have merged all the three tracks or three thematic sessions, aspects of the workshops, so that we would look at it whether we still have opportunity of bringing up some other workshops?
No, Mary, I'm sorry, can I just, I don't think Jutta Group didn't say they didn't consider diversity. I think they just said they would have appreciated even greater diversity in the workshop. So maybe we can just ask at this point Jutta to kind of restate what she said and then come back in.
Yeah, she can clarify what maybe I heard wrongly. Please, Jutta.
So what we identified in the security group was that we would have expected more diversity, especially after providing this elaborate system of declaring how diversity was addressed by the proposers. And what we found among the 86 proposals was that some were addressing diversity quite well, but we also had other workshop proposals that did not address diversity as much as we had expected them to do. And of course, this was taken in consideration with when we did the selection of proposals. You remember that diversity had a weight of 20% for the overall score. So of course, we had a look at all these proposals, whether they had enough diversity.
Thank you. So when you were selecting the extra 5 or 6, the extra 5, there was 16. There were 16 already that the secretariat had approved, and you were to select additional 4 to make it 40. I mean to make it 20. Did you find to make it 20? Did you find any gaps to fill in with those workshops for any of them that had any of the diversity gaps you must have experienced in your own workshops?
So the workshops we identified to fill the gaps also were high-scoring proposals, and the 2 that I had mentioned before, the 150 and the 22 proposal, they did not address diversity as a single workshop proposals, but merged together. They would address diversity quite well, given the condition that was set that they also should include the technical community perspective and probably combine that with more regional diversity. And that shall be guided by Sylvia and Maria, and I do think they know pretty well the job they have overtaken.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, for looking for clarification if it hadn't been understood clearly before. Any other general comments? So as I said, next I'd really like to go to Daniela, if there are any kind of observations, and then we'll come to the Secretariat so we can make sure that you have everything you need for next steps too.
Thank you, Lynn, and first of all, thank to all of those who worked in the 3 working groups, and especially to the 3 speakers of them. I hadn't seen the selection before, and I have to say I'm quite impressed. I think there was really worth doing that selection process, also grouping the workshops around the 3 themes, and then giving a structure for people who are coming to the IGF and helping them to go through the week following their special interests, several special interests. I very much liked the diagrams with the flows. That was very convincing to me. And as Lynn said, it would be very helpful to have the 6 sub-themes also in slightly similar way, because I think that's very helpful. If you come and then you're especially interested in data governance and then you see the structure, that's much easier than just looking to the whole program. So I think you all made very, very much progress. Thanks for that.
I would concur as well, and I said it's really amazing the sense you can get even just from the titles. Chengetai?
No, the only thing we have to say is that we do echo the same sentiments that you expressed and that Daniela has expressed. And it was the first time we did this, and it was really great work, and it's come out a very organized flow, and I think it's easy to get the sense of it. We'll work with the groups, we'll collate the questions and the comments and help with the contact of the workshop proposers and also with the mergers, etc. That's what we're going to do from here. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chengetai. And I think each one of the groups had a couple of, if there was time or if there are additional slots. And
Exactly.
as we go through that, I think if you can just make sure that we're communicating back to the thematic working groups in terms of what's happening with those, so that they can continue to build the full flow. I'm sure you would do that anyway, but just to ensure that we understood who was going to take the responsibility, because I think now the next step is with the Secretariat to determine if there are sort of room and slots, and depending on how much room and how many slots, I think then we need to figure out what's the right way to do that across the 3 thematic working groups. But I think then the next step is is yours, is the Secretariat's. In this session, we're doing fairly well on time. Actually, we're doing quite well on time. We wanted a quick discussion on the top and tail thematic planning sessions. I think where we're at and the expectation with the Secretariat is that the topping and the tailing would be normal workshop session slots. Let me start with the tailing end first, because I think the top kind of leads us into the main session later as well. But I think the notion, following discussions of the Secretariat and the various working groups, is that we would build from the individual reporting processes that each one of the workshops is building, and we can talk about that later as well, but there's a build out based on the policy questions, what you expect to achieve, what are the key messages. There's a series of submissions that are sent to the Secretariat ahead of the IGF so that they can support other marketing and outreach and even press packages and things in the past. And then, of course, immediately after, there's some high-level messages that have come out of the group, and then the messages that ultimately make their way into both the fuller report of the working group and then of the chair's report. But I think the idea was that in each one of these individual tailing sessions, there would be a review of kind of the messages that have come through. If there was some way to make it not just a list or a kind of list of the messages, but really almost try and build the same sort of flow that we saw in these charts here, which said either by main topic, these were some of the main messages, whether if we take the digital inclusion flow, for those sort of buckets that were there in this particular issue, these were some of the things that had, a lot of resonance. These were some of the key messages that the workshop participants took away and fed that in. We could actually then use that to support the initial discussions next year. If people were wanting to understand what happened in that particular track, how successful was it, were there any hanging issues, were there anything we should be building on, just to try and support a transition, if and as appropriate. And then the expectation is that on Friday, on the last day, we would actually have an hour, which would be part of this 3-hour closing ceremony at the end, but 1 hour would be based on kind of recapping what's happened in each one of these thematic tracks and what some of the key messages and takeaways were. So let me just stop there and we'll come to the tailing in a moment, but we're all feeling our way through here, so none of this is cast in stone. I tried to just summarize discussions I've kind of had and heard from around the room, so if anybody thinks anything different, they should say so, including the Secretariat too, if there's a different comment. Right now we have, and we'll come to the topping in a moment, but Timea, you're in the queue, you have the floor.
So I have a comment and / proposal for the tailing session. But before I get to that, I just wanted to clarify the process regarding the workshop selections. Are we then now saying these 60 that were selected by the working groups, are these the final ones? We are going to contact the organizers and draw the line here, or is there any more work that we need to be doing, just from my peace of mind?
I think it's a good question. I think the assumption we were taking away is that the 20 that have come in from each of the 3 working groups are approved. The ones that were sort of below the line, if you will, which said, space pending or of spaces, the Secretariat is going to go away, and once they have that first pass of the scheduling, look and come back to the 3 working groups with an indication of what space is available, and then they would oversee a process that would allocate, if there is additional space according to, again, I think we need to look at what space is available and which ones are below the line.
Yeah, we'll do it space in one of those 2 rooms per theme, right? Each room has got, each theme has got 2 rooms. So if there's space in that room, then we'll allocate according from that theme. So that's how we'll do it. And this is quite easy because we know the first one goes and then the second and third.
Thank you very much for clarifying that. So I'm going to my my second point, which regards the tailing sessions. I think in order for us to have a quite an impactful wrap up of the week, we need to reflect a little bit on how we are reporting out from each session, how we're collecting those reports, and how would those feed into the conversation at the end. I think that, as has been said before, and even yesterday, I think Wolfgang put it pretty well, and we were reading through the little leaflet that Eurodic has here, and I'm going to quote it from here. Sorry, Ben, for stealing your idea. The colleagues at Eurodic say that Eurodic is a decision-shaping, not a decision-making body, and then therefore a place to start and facilitate discussion, but not to finalize it. I think that is captures very, very well. So chapeau, Sandra, for putting it that well. That summarizes really what we're supposed to do at the IGF. And I was wondering, how are we thinking about the messages that would inform discussions and decisions elsewhere, but not put us in a position where we actually need to draw out a message on a particular issue or a solution or recommendation, or call it whatever. So I was thinking, and as I was reading through the workshop proposals, I keep seeing that certain workshops, certain sessions approach the issue of inclusion, or the issue of data governance, or the issue of security or safety from a particular policy angle that the proposers deemed, important for them, and those can be ranked in my mind into various bigger policy buckets, and I see that either addressing social or cultural issues, either addressing economic issues, either addressing substantive technical issues, or broader governance considerations, consideration of cooperation, of multi-stakeholderism, and that leads me in my mind, because I like to think about matrices, into a 3x4 table, and the 3 being the 3 tracks that we have, and the 4 being these 4 policy buckets I just mentioned. And I'm wondering if we can think about asking the rapporteurs of all these sessions to come back at the end of these detailing sessions and say, okay, we considered inclusion in my workshops from an economic perspective, and this is what we thought. These are some case studies we found. These are some issues that we couldn't find an answer to. These are messages that we think actually should be picked up and promoted widely. Somebody else could come in, but we actually considered this from a governance point of view, or we have a technical issue that I think should be included there. So we wouldn't make every workshop come up with one single message, but say, okay, I'm considering this policy issue, I'm considering that policy issue. Taking all of the sessions together, then at the end, we would come up with some sort of a menu from IGF 2019 Berlin on the issues that we were discussing. We would avoid somehow negotiating these messages, but we still would have a really comprehensive overview of what has happened. So if we could facilitate the reporting out, I think the 2-step approach we had last year with a short report and a long report would already have us look into this pretty easily. And then we can perhaps later on see if we can also pull in messages from open forums or day 0 sessions, the dynamic coalitions, or the main sessions as well into that, and then weave these things through. So sorry for the long explanation. I hope this makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a very interesting idea. What I think we need to do, there was a series of both documents and meetings last year that produced some documents which were given throughout the process. I think we need to pull that process back out, those documents back out, and get a small ad hoc working group, I think, to actually look through that because of these topping and tailing sessions, because of what we've said we're going to do with providing kind of this thematic overview to the workshop organizers, and really try and kick our whole kind of reporting out process up to the next level. So I think that's a pretty substantive piece of work, and I think it's probably best served with an ad hoc working group. But I like that idea, and what I like about it is because it starts to kind of beg the question of, so where does this information go? Who should get it? Because if you can identify kind of the question, then you can figure out what it is you're trying to solve and then direct it differently as well. So I think it's a really interesting suggestion, and I think I'd like to work with the Secretariat to get a request out to the MAG for who wants to participate in this ad hoc working group. And it's one that I think probably has about a 6 weeks life cycle or something, because I think we need to get it done quite early so that we can inform the workshop organizers so that everybody starts getting prepared as we go forward. And I think that would support the tailing sessions, and it would support the closing session on the Friday as well. So I think that was a really good suggestion. Rudolph had asked to be in the queue, so we'll go to Rudolph and then we'll go to Maria. Rudolph?
Thank you very much. I have one question. Is there every day a tailing session or just at the end of the IGF? That's one question. Then one remark. We are intending to cooperate again with the Diplo Foundation not on a, let's say, political or negotiation level, but in order to capture what has been discussed during the day. And third point, we also were planning to have this kind of exercise at the beginning of the parliamentarian session, to have rapporteurs, because that will already be towards the end of the IGF, not exactly, but towards the end, and to have rapporteurs, to perhaps high-ranking rapporteurs, to inform the parliamentarians about the discussions during the IGF in the 3 tracks. So that would also then, this work would also feed into this parliamentarian session.
To answer your first question, I think the notion was that there was sort of one at the end of the track. I don't think there's any difficulty with doing one at the end of each day if we wanted a shorter one, given there seems to be some additional time in each track. But if we do that, then we're taking away from potentially adding another workshop. So I think we can maybe leave that. With respect to the reporting that's done, I mean, the Diplo reporting is fun and it's interesting. I think actually a number of people here would actually like something more substantive and more concrete along some other examples we've seen in the community as well. So we're trying to figure out what that might look like and how we might actually get it funded and supported. So I'd like to sort of hold that open a little bit as well for this other ad hoc working group. To take nothing away from Diplo and what they're doing, but just put a marker down that we're trying to figure out if there's some way we can get, similar to some of the things Timea said, a more substantive sort of set of reports and something maybe more useful, and maybe even something that we could ensure was appropriate to reach out to other bodies either for further engagement or potential action. I think that was all your questions. Maria, you have the floor.
Yes, Maria Paz Canales, Civil Society for the record. I never say it. So. Just to add to the point that was raised by Timea, I totally agree that there is a need to provide kind of a flow to this tail session of each one of the tracks. I think that the idea of like clustering according to these criteria that she was mentioning, it's a very good idea. Another option will be like to precisely use this flow that we are doing in each one of the tracks as a way to identify these clusters and maybe like honor the bottom-up spirit of the IGF and have a tail session of each one of the tracks that is more like a breakout section in which we could like ask to the different organizer of the workshops in each one of the tracks to fulfill a role as a kind of part of the commitment of being selected, in which they will have like a task of not provide an extensive summary, but at least like a short, I don't know, answer to the same policy question that they presented as part of the workshop. So they show up in each one of these breakup groups inside the track. They provide this input and they spark like a last chance for having like more open up community discussion about these ideas that were raised in the specific topics in these clusters according to the flow of the track. I think that that will be like an easy way to fulfill this spirit that Timea was pointing out, that precisely the Euro IGF has in the sense of decision shaping and not decision making. And it will provide this criteria that is not only what is reported by the organizers of the workshop, but also more opportunity to the community to rethink about what they have heard in all those days and recap, and that finally could feed to the closing session in some way with some kind of rapporteur or something like that. I don't know, I think that can be like a complementary proposal for handling this. Thank you.
No, I think there's some good ideas there as well. We'll keep working through the queue. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Paul Rowney. Firstly, I'll just echo what's been said before me, and I don't want to repeat that. But it's also difficult to separate the topping from the tailing, because I think they feed into each other, and it's important to talk about both. I don't see these things as main sessions or workshops per se. I see them as sessions that will introduce the theme, give the context, set expectations. I like the idea of encouraging the rapporteurs and possibly even the moderators to participate, so we can also set what our expectations are of them to bring in some consistency. And at the opening workshop, or session, we're really introducing what the stream is about, setting the expectations. And I think it could be useful to have at least one representative from each of the stakeholder groups as well, just to give an input or thought of what they expect to get out of that particular stream. And of course get participation from the audience. And as Tamir was talking about, through the whole process of the stream is to find a way to capture the issues that are arising out of the different workshops and the messages, so that can get fed into the tailing or the closing. And the closing is, in my mind, where we bring up these key issues that have come, or the key messages that have come out of the workshops, discuss, how people can continue to participate, where they can go to access the reports and the information and get the feedback, etc. And then have the same representatives, stakeholder representatives, just to give their views on how they thought the workshop went and what they got out of it, and of course the view from the audience, whether they felt the whole experience useful and if they actually got anything positive out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And some really good ideas and good comments coming out of the discussion here. Raquel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. I will be short. I know we're almost in the lunch break. I just want to support the ad hoc group to work further those questions, and I would like to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. We will put out a request on the mailing list so that people can indicate that there. No need to do it here. Ben Wallace. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. I think what I particularly like about Timea's proposal is that it can provide a consistent way of having these sessions. I think we need to be able to have the same approach for each of the topping and tailing sessions across the 3 working groups. But I think it's very helpful to also incorporate a consistent and useful, helpful way of getting the rapporteurs to report. And that can feed in not only to a productive tailing session, but also helping with the way the final report and the chair's messages and the reporting out is organized in a way that's easily searchable and groupable. So I think it's great to take this forward into a working group, and I think Timea's ideas provide a really good starting point. And this isn't to do with Timea's suggestion particularly, but I remember a session at my first IGF in Mexico where there were 20 people positioned in chairs across the stage, and I'm just conscious that these are tailing sessions looking to somehow gather insights from 20 different sessions. So we need some kind of creative thinking to make sure that it doesn't become a parade of 20 rapporteurs taking 2 or 3 minutes each. And I'm sure there are ways around that, but thank you.
Yeah, clearly that wasn't the intent, and I'm sure with all the creativity in this room, we can find a way to make it interesting. Jutta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn, for giving me the floor. I just would like to underline the importance of the policy question that we already have. I do think it was a very good suggestion that you made before, that probably the proposers of workshops that were accepted should be informed about the policy question that the other workshop proposers in the same under the same main theme are addressing, so that would help them to complement each other in a way, and then also the policy questions will give us guidance, I do think, for the tailing session as well. Thank you.
No, I think that's a good point, Jutta. Mary, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. During the Geneva meeting, I think we agreed that messages that will come out from the workshops will be grouped into what exactly we'll be communicating to the stakeholder groups, right? And what will be useful to each stakeholder group. And so if I get Timia right, first that the messages should not be too many so that they can get it. Second is that when a workshop would have been concluded and a message drawn out of a workshop, wouldn't it be flogging and getting people not overburdened by the term closing? I need to get it right. Maybe I'm not getting it right. Maybe I need clarification. The telling, would it happen at the workshop room, or it will be a different room? That's one. Second, the messages, are we targeting stakeholder groups, or are we targeting economic, social, and all the cultural messages? So, because I think the output of the IGF we should be able to send messages to all the stakeholder groups that are attending the IGF, and not necessarily whether it's a cultural or economic or social messages. I need to reconcile that. Maybe you clarify that to me, Chair.
Thank you, Mary. Good questions. I actually think there's two things we're trying to serve. If you're a workshop organizer and you spent the time to submit a proposal and think about policy questions and get people to participate and run the workshop, moderate, report, you probably want, a fairly substantive report out from that meeting for your own purposes and your own use. And I think that's one stream of reporting we need to do. And I think there's a pretty good process for that already documented. I think we're talking about maybe shaping it a little bit differently so it fits a higher aggregation of messages as well. So I think we still have the individual workshop reports that come out. I think what Timea was suggesting, I think actually aligns well with the stakeholder groups, but I think it gives us a pretty nice way to actually take a small number of high-level messages to the group. If we said in the digital inclusion track, we can go quickly through the flow chart, here's the topics that were covered, here's some of the main policy questions, and then maybe there's a way to turn it and say, so rather than not a report out of this happened in this workshop and this one, but here's some of the things we actually hear that would be appropriate for the private sector of an economic sense, and I'm not even sure we would target the categories that Timea labeled to specific stakeholders, but I think in many cases there's maybe a primary stakeholder, but I think there are other stakeholders that are interested in them as well. I mean, even if it's an economic issue, it's not just going to be the private sector that would be interested, it would be governments and policymakers as well. But I think splitting it out to technical, political, social, et cetera, is an interesting way to aggregate them to a number of high-level messages, and also I think start to have so much with the information, I think, is what's your road into understanding the information that's actually there? What's the right way to do that? And I think it's a, kind of a gentle framing, if you will, that would still get a lot of those high-level messages, and then they could drill down if they wanted to by workshop or topic. So I don't think we've left the stakeholder notion behind, and I think it's a way of trying to provide a higher level aggregation of input while still having all the detail behind at the workshop level. But again, I think this is something the ad hoc working group will work through, and I think it'd be really helpful if you were a part of that as well, because you can help make sure we're being clear with it. And I think actually there was a pretty good document from the Secretariat last year that laid out the reporting process that we expected from a workshop organizer standpoint. Maybe we can just dust that off, make it clear that it was last year's process, and send it out to the MAG so that they're aware of it. And obviously there are some MAG members that would be less aware of it because they weren't MAG members last year. And that could be just a good starting point. And I think we're thinking that the topping and the tailing sessions are 90 minutes long, so they're substantive meetings, and we should expect engagement from the community just as we do on all the other workshops as well. You go back to the list. Kenta, you have the floor.
Sorry, thank you. My name is Kenta Mochiuki, a Japanese MAG member from business sector community. So first of all, thank you very much for giving me the floor. So my comment is just regarding the training sessions. I support what Timea and the previous speaker said, and we also have to think about the burden of reporters or organizers if we request quick reports from every reporter or organizers. Especially now, the training sessions are scheduled on day 4 at 11:10. But there are several workshops just before the training session, so we have to think about how we can get the report from those workshops. Thank you.
I'm not sure I understand the point about the several workshops before the 10 sessions.
I missed your question, sorry.
No, if you could just repeat your last point, maybe speak just a little more slowly. I'm not sure I understood the question about the workshops that were before the 10 sessions.
Yes. Actually, so far, our training sessions are scheduled day 4 at 11:10. But according to the current schedule, there are several workshops just before the training sessions. So my question is, how will we be able to gather quick reports from those sessions? If we request them to submit quick reports as soon as possible after finishing the sessions, it might be a huge burden for them because they might want to make some networking just after the sessions, or maybe they have to receive some questions from the participants. So it might be very difficult for the organizers or reporters to issue some kind of quick reports just after the session. So that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, I think now I understand it. And it was basically that in the tentative schedule that we have, it had the tailing sessions before some of the sessions had completed. So we need to find a way, I think, to look at that and figure out how to pull them in.
Yeah, I mean.
Chagatai says, yes, we need to look at it. And probably be creative with respect to how we actually do that. Paul Charlton, you have the floor. I'm sorry, wait a minute. Timea, some of the people are in and out of the queue.
I just wanted to respond to Mary, but I can do that in the end. So I'm happy to give the floor to Paul.
Paul, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify, and maybe Tamea, when she comes in after me, can answer my question. But my understanding is we will still have our individual reports out of each workshop. And then the next step, the idea of the tailing then is that we will have discussions on one tailing session per each theme, or it would go down to sub themes as well. That's one question. The other thing is, in terms of the substance of the tailing discussions, I share Ben's concern about having the parade of rapporteurs. So I'm imagining that the idea is to have a sort of a value added, because we already know, we'll find out what the rapporteurs say when we get the workshop reports. So then the idea of the tailing session is then it's sort of a new discussion, but building on what's come out of the workshops. Or is it just addressing the themes without necessarily referring back then to the workshops? Just for clarification.
So we'll let Tamea come in. I think I can say, authoritatively, there will be no parade of rapporteurs. We're not looking for a panel of 20, or we need to find a way to bring the messages up to that. Tamea, do you want to come in, and then I'll see, or Chengetai, do you want to?
No, I'll.
So Tamea, and then.
Thank you. I don't want to presuppose that I have the answers to every question, especially not the ones that the Secretariat knows way better than I do. My idea was that, my idea was that obviously all sessions would still have their long reports, and then we can look back into those, and we'll tag them and put them on the website, so that I think that's very, very useful. And it's impossible to capture all the nuances of a 1.5 hour discussion into a couple of messages. So I think the reports should be there still. To Kenta's point, probably a little bit later in the week, or later in the month, sometime before Christmas, so that we do get them together. But I wanted to actually get back to what Mary was asking, and although economic and social and technical and governance issues sound like 4 stakeholder groups, that was in no way my intention. If I may give an example, look, for example, to gender inclusion. You can approach that in so many different lenses. You can look at, okay, what is the economic potential missed by not having women online? How many jobs? How much investment? How much creativity is being lost? If you look at that from including women online in different cultural settings, that's different. Look at including in the global south, including them in Europe, including them in rural communities, including them in urban communities. That's another, in my mind, social and cultural norm difference issue. If you look at the actual technical possibility of reaching women, is that a language issue? Is that a universal acceptance issue? Is that a broadband issue? Those are technical considerations. And then you have how do different branches of government communicate with each other when they want to solve this issue? How do different stakeholders communicate with each other? How do different parts of the world, international organizations work to solve this issue? Those are governance issues. But in no way should only the business sector be dealing with solving the economic issues, or in no way should only civil society be dealing with solving social issues, or it's not only the government's job to solve governance issues. So although they might sound that they have a lead to that, I don't think that's the spirit of the IGF, and I don't think that in our reporting we should be looking into providing specific messages to specific stakeholders. I think we need to look at policy issues and then use the spirit of the multi-stakeholder discussion at IGF to underline that each have part in each. I hope that makes it clearer.
Short response, Mary.
Okay. It makes a lot of sense to me, but I thought those would have been what we have in the policy questions. Okay, when it comes to reporting, messages. We're sending messages to each stakeholder group, so we'll be targeting what would each stakeholder group benefit from the discussion that we had during the workshop, and ideas that come from every other participant in the workshop. And again, when it is overflooded, I mean, people get discouraged in reading, so we make it as sharp and as concise as possible so that it will interest the stakeholder group to actually read. There are some that if you write too much, they will not have interest to go through all that. I agree with you, the long report should be. But at the close of each workshop, I think the messages from the policy questions summary will come out from the rapporteurs, and that will feed into what we are sending to each stakeholder group. I think we are saying the same thing, and I get what you have done.
So thank you, Mary. I think there's some really good comments there as well, and I really do hope you'll join the working group. I'm going to make sure that the Secretariat actually sends last year's process around so we all have in front of us a good idea of what the workshop organizers were asked to do last year, and we will evolve that in line with the discussion we'll have in the ad hoc working group. I'm going to pass the floor to Chengetai, then Maria, and then just a couple of final comments before we break for lunch. And then, because we're past the hour already, and I think people are probably getting hungry. So, Chengetai.
Thank you, Lynn. I just had a quick comment, and we will pass along what the workshop proposers were asked to do. It also included the IGF messages that they had to derive from their sessions, but we'll pass that along. I just wanted to comment on the tail end that I don't think that the tail end should be not connected with what has gone on through the 4 weeks, through the 4 days. So it should be connected, not, a table of 20 people saying something, but it should be something that summarizes in some way and comes to some sort of conclusion that people can go home with, and that also can be discussed in the afternoon session that we're going to have. A shorter version that's going to be discussed in the afternoon session, which will include also the findings of the best practice forums and etc.
So we have Maria, you have the floor.
Yeah, only to add to just the point that Chengetai raised, I think that there are a few practical things again that we need to bear in mind in order to make the most effective process possible in which we're trying to build here as new methodology that we are trying to implement to in general be clear in the message that we want to transmit. And I think that just rescue what Jutta said a few minutes ago regarding that not lose of sight that we identify as a key question, as a key element of the programming, the identification of the policy question. So we cannot change then the logical framework that we ask to the participant to think about. So I understand the idea of cluster about economic, social issues, technical issues, but if you invite people to be part of a session that poses a specific policy question, you should allow them to follow the flow of that conversation and in some way reflect those, obviously clustered in some way, because you cannot have like a tailing session for each one of the programming session, but in a way that is easy to recognize for who participate before in the discussion, so they can follow like the intellectual process of how this conversation started, developed, and is being concluding. And I think that we need to, for that, separate the issue of like the specific report of the entire sessions that will follow probably the process and will build on top of what had been done in the past years, which is one thing, and there we will find like the full information about what happened precisely in that topic, and separate that from the message that we will be asking to these people that were in charge of this session to bring to the tailing session will be like more shorter and condensed and in my suggestion that I don't think, I'm not sure if there is agreement about that or not, in my suggestion, in my view, those should be like, again, sparkling points for like finalizing the discussion in this breakout session in the tailing session. So in that way, you don't have 20 people in a panel because you will have, I don't know, 5 breakout in the tailing session, which rapporteur from the different sessions that were touching in that thematic cluster, and then you can bring what happened in that tail session of each one of the track to the final session closing in the IGF, in which you will have one from each track. So you have 3 people in total, like representing the summary of the conclusion. I don't know if that's precisely the methodology, but only to clarify that we are talking about different issues. One is the report that is trying to capture the total discussion, and other one, the high-level takeaways that we need to discuss in this tailing session and we need to bring to the conclusion of the event. It's how I see it. I don't know if that's useful for the rest of the man. Thank you.
No, thank you, Maria. I mean, I think that captures, again, what I think we're saying is that there are different phases of reporting for different purposes, and we'll pull that apart a little bit more in the ad hoc working group. Sylvia, you have the floor. For those who didn't hear, Sylvia said she'll wait until after lunch. She's hungry. So I'll ask Daniela for a few comments and then a quick proceed to the afternoon and lunch. Sorry.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, very briefly, 3 points. I wanted to support Jutta and Maria. I think if you have asked policy questions, then there should be an answer. I mean, my expectations from a closing or a tailing session is that I get an impression of what has been discussed to these policy questions, because personally I couldn't have been in all of the workshops, so I expect to get the information there. But when Temea explained how she's thinking in a matrix, then it came to my mind that, you know, there are these artists who are painting a sort of mind map while there are rapporteurs explaining what has been discussed over the week, and maybe that could be a sort of an idea for the hour then in the closing session at the end. And my last point is just a pragmatical one, coming back to Kita, who asked how can we have that input from the workshops in the morning to the tailing session, and maybe we can just move the workshops to 9 o'clock in the morning, and the tailing session go from 11:30 to 12:30, or just have a shorter lunch, 1:30, and have a shorter lunch break, and then there is a break between the 2 sessions, and then that can be integrated in the tailing session. Thanks.
And that's a good suggestion for the scheduling, and a great suggestion for the programmatic. Those maps are amazing. I think the people that do them are amazing in terms of how they can track the conversation and draw at the same time, and it actually does capture well the discussion. So just this afternoon, we'll come back at 3 o'clock. We will hit the topping piece of the discussion quickly, and then go into the main session discussion, which is the next remaining very significant piece of work for the group here over the next few days. And just to get something for discussion over lunch, the 2 sort of kind of models I've heard for the topping session was one which is kind of a straightforward introduction. Here's the track, the themes, the workshops, you know, maybe there's something on context or positioning or definitional, but kind of a more traditional, stomach's growling, a more traditional introduction. The other one was maybe because the slot's 90 minutes, maybe take a half hour and do that, but take another hour and actually have somebody who actually gave kind of, I don't know, an inspirational, aspirational, or challenging speech from a very different perspective. What would be interesting is if we did something like that, that would give us the opportunity to invite political scientists, social scientists, philosophers, the other sorts of people we've all been wanting to more broadly engage, in which we think would enrich the discussions, and of course, which the Secretary General exhorted us to do in his comments last year. But it would be a different perspective and a different richness as well. So maybe there's even, a way to do a little bit of that, a kind of visionary or inspirational or challenging speaker or some different perspective that maybe we haven't pulled in. So I just leave that there. We'll come back after lunch and I think have a discussion on the topping session, and then we'll go into the mailing session, the main session planning. And before we start that, Chengetai and the Secretary will actually walk us through kind of the current state of the overall scheduling, so we all have this overall framework in mind as well. We found a good compromise. There will be no physical out-of-the-room coffee break, but everybody has coffee in front of them here in the room, and the snacks and food will be in the back of the room. So as people desire, they can go back and grab their snacks and their food, and the coffee is in front of you, and treat that as a solid 3-hour working block, as we've traditionally done, because we do still have an awful lot to do. And lunch is downstairs where it was yesterday, just one floor down. Thank you, everybody. See you back here at 3 local time for those online.